Did you know that over 250,000 murder cases in Hong Kong remain unsolved? Now imagine a killer so meticulous that even the sharpest detective is left grasping at shadows. Can a killer really outsmart a detective? Let's find out. In the early 1980s, Hong Kong was gripped by fear. A serial killer struck on rainy nights, targeting young women and leaving behind gruesome evidence. The press called him the Rainy Night Butcher, but one detective was determined to stop him, no matter the cost. Today's story takes us back to Hong Kong in the early 1980s. A case that shook Hong Kong unfolded as the perpetrator repeatedly targeted young women on rainy nights, instilling fear across the city. This individual became infamously known as the Rainy Night Butcher. What happened to these women? What horrific acts did the perpetrator commit? Let's travel back to February 12, 1982 to unravel the case. It all began on the morning of February 12, 1982. A sanitation worker in Hong Kong's Sha Tin district made a horrifying discovery: a decaying human head floating in the Shingmun River. Over the next few days, police found more body parts, each meticulously dismembered. The victim was identified as 22-year-old Chan Funlin, a nightclub worker who had been missing for 10 days. As detectives pieced together her final moments, they learned she was last seen intoxicated, getting into a taxi. But with no leads on the driver and no witnesses, the case stalled. And then, the murders continued. It was a Friday morning, and a sanitation worker was performing his routine job along the Shingmun River in the Sha Tin district, Hong Kong. His task was to clear debris from the river to avoid obstructing the construction work on the riverbank. As he approached the Leon Bridge, he noticed something floating in the water. Curiosity drove him closer, and when he retrieved the object, he discovered it was a decaying human head. The worker was horrified and nearly fainted. He quickly ran ashore and called the police. Upon arrival, the authorities examined the head, noting its curly hair, which seemed freshly permed, 3 false teeth in the mouth, and golden round earrings on both ears. Preliminary assessments identified the victim as a woman. The head had been submerged for an extended period, causing severe swelling and making facial recognition impossible. A thorough search led the police to a yellow plastic bag about 650 feet from the initial site. Inside, they found a human leg. Over the next 4 days, additional searches of nearby waterways uncovered the upper torso and an arm. A distinctive tattoo on the arm depicted a sword piercing a heart, with a marred bird perched beside it. Tattoos on women were uncommon at the time, making this a vital clue for identification. The police publicized this tattoo, hoping someone would recognize it. Shortly afterward, a middle-aged man and a young man came forward at the police station claiming to be the victim's father and husband. The older man explained that his daughter had false teeth to enhance her appearance and had a tattoo of a swallow by a heart on her right arm, matching the description. This confirmed the victim's identity as 22-year-old Chan Funlin, a nightclub worker from Sim Shui. She was married with 2 daughters and had been missing for 10 days before her remains were found. During their investigation into Chan Funlin's own family and social life, the police uncovered suspicious details. Chan Funlin and her husband were reportedly having unmarital issues. While working at the nightclub, she had been pursued by a man nicknamed Four Eyes, who wanted her to leave her husband and be with him. When her husband discovered this, he confronted Four Eyes. While this was considered a potential motive, the husband provided a solid alibi and was ruled out as a suspect. The police also investigated Chi Four Eyes, but they found no incriminating evidence against him. They learned that Chan Funlan had previously worked at another bar and had borrowed Kiwa's 500 Hong Kong dollars yuan from that establishment. However, this lead also failed to produce results. The focus of the investigation then shifted to a taxi stand on Kimberley Road, wherein Chan Funlin was last seen before her disappearance. According to her colleagues, on the night of February 3rd, she became heavily intoxicated and was not in a clear state of mind. Some of her co-workers helped her get a taxi and watched as she left. After that, no one ever saw her again. Her husband confirmed that she did not return home that night. The police attempted to track down the taxi but no one could recall its license plate number. Given their large number of taxis in the area, this search proved extremely challenging. In the months that followed, women continued to disappear. In the same area, these incidents always occurred on rainy nights, spreading fear and anxiety throughout the community. In one case, a woman reportedly jumped out of a taxi on a rainy night, fearing for her safety due to the ongoing disappearances. Despite extensive investigations, no significant progress was made in the case. However, a breakthrough occurred in mid-August, when the police received a phone call that marked a turning point. The caller was an employee at a photo processing shop. He reported that while developing some photos, he noticed images resembling human body parts. Alarmed by this discovery, he contacted the police. Responding swiftly, the police arrived at the shop. According to the information gathered, the photos in question had not been taken by the shop itself, but were brought in by a customer. The customer had asked for assistance because their own equipment was malfunctioning. An employee named Jiang shared that this wasn't the first time the customer had brought in photos. The customer claimed to work as a photographer in a mortuary, responsible for taking pictures of body parts to prevent alarming other staff. Jiang would usually handle such photos himself. However, he had stepped out that day, and another employee processed the photos. Startled by what they saw, the employee called the police. After assessing the situation, the police examined the photos. Based on the condition of the depicted body part, forensic experts determined that the time of death was no more than 3 hours, yet before the photos were taken. If these had been risk cadavers used for educational purposes, they would typically have been preserved for much longer and would have already shown signs of rigor mortis. However, the bodies in the photos clearly had not reached that stage. Furthermore, the way the body parts were dismembered suggested that the person responsible lacked medical training and did not use specialized surgical tools. This ruled out the possibility of the photos being related to medical education materials. Forensic scientists concluded that the photos were not copies, but were taken directly of the bodies. In one photo, they noticed a small reflective area in the upper right corner, which turned out to be a water droplet. When magnified, the droplet revealed the partial reflection of a girl's face. Her appearance closely resembled that of Leong Sum, a 17-year-old girl, who had been reported missing a month earlier. As a result, the customer who brought in the photos was added to the high list of suspects. Fear gripped the city as more women vanished on rainy nights. The police were desperate. Then a breakthrough. An employee at a photo shop reported disturbing images of dismembered body parts. The photos had been brought in by a customer who claimed he worked in a mortuary. But forensic experts noticed something chilling. The victims had been killed just hours before the pictures were taken. A single clue in one of the photos, a water droplet reflecting a young girl's face, gave investigators their first real lead. Now they just had to wait for the suspect to return. However, Zhang Lao could only provide a vague description of the customer's appearance and had no knowledge of his name or address. The police had no choice but to patiently wait for the suspect to return to the shop to retrieve the photos. To avoid waking a sleeping giant, the police devised a plan for a discreet ambush. Several undercover officers posed as shop employees, customers, and street vendors in the vicinity, closely monitoring all activity at the photo shop. At 6 p.m. on August 17, a taxi pulled up, in front of the shop, and a man in his 20s stepped out of the driver's seat. Finally, the police had their opportunity. As anticipated, before collecting the photos, the man inspected them and set aside the ones that were not his. Once the situation was confirmed, the police immediately apprehended him. The man claimed he was picking up the photos for a friend. who worked at a nice newspaper office. The police agreed to accompany him to deliver the photos, but upon arrival, the described friend was just nowhere to be found. His story was entirely fabricated. The police arrested the man on the spot and impounded his taxi R-rated for further examination. On August 17, 1982, a man stepped into the shop to retrieve his photos. The police, disguised as customers, were ready. The suspect was 27-year-old taxi driver Lam Karan. A search of his home revealed a chilling scene: photography equipment, anatomy textbooks, preserved body parts, and videotapes documenting his crimes. But Karan denied everything. That is, until detectives confronted him with the one thing he feared most: his crimes becoming public knowledge. In a moment of twisted vanity, he finally confessed. The suspect was identified as Lam Karan, a 27-year-old night shift taxi driver. He lived on Rao Go Street in Tukwawan with his half-siblings. Karan's childhood was far from happy. His parents got divorced when he was young, and his father subsequently went through 2 more marriages. Karan grew up in a household filled with arguments and violence, which left him also emotionally distant. When questioned by the police, Lam Karan displayed a calm and emotionless demeanor. His ability to predict the officers' questions and respond without hesitation was unsettling. A search of Karan's residence revealed a large collection of professional photography equipment. It appeared that Karan had set up a fully equipped photo studio in his small room. Karan's room was situated near his father's room, with his sister living across the hall. The family's living room was farther inside the apartment, while Karan's room was closest to the main entrance. He shared a bunk bed with his younger brother, who slept on the top bunk while Karan occupied the bottom. Underneath his bed, police discovered a large trunk. They had frequently seen this trunk in photos developed at a shop, leading them to conclude that Karan's bedroom was one of the locations where these disturbing images were taken. Upon opening the trunk, they found numerous explicit photographs, anatomy textbooks, and countless images of dismembered female body parts. In addition, they discovered over 40 videotapes, a red handbag, a pair of white shoes, and various surgical tools. When investigators spotted a familiar heart tattoo in one of the photos, they realized they were dealing with a case far more sinister than they had initially imagined. What followed shocked everyone present in the room. Several open plastic jars emitted a foul stench. Upon closer inspection, the jars were found to contain preserved female genitalia submerged in liquid. They also identified strands of hair and bloodstains on the walls, indicating that more violence had taken place. Due to the sheer volume of evidence, the police took 4 days to conduct a thorough search of Karan's residence. His father, Lin W., and his half-brother, Lam Kwak Kung, were also taken into custody. Although substantial evidence was found in the home, Karan continued to deny his crimes. During interrogation, the police then turned their attention to his father and brother. Shockingly, both claimed they had been completely unaware of the gruesome activities in their own home. When they learned about the horrifying evidence, they expressed fear and disbelief. Lam Kwak Kung revealed that his brother was highly secretive and wouldn't allow anyone to touch his belongings, often becoming enraged if they did. For the police, time was of the essence. Without locating the victims' bodies, they could only detain Karan for 48 hours. To expedite evidence collection, they assigned personnel to review the videotapes found in Karan's possession. Most tapes contained irrelevant content, but 3 stood out. These 3 tapes, titled Serious Secrets, Action on Rainy Nights, and Fourth Action, were self-produced by Karan. At the time, producing such tapes required significant effort for an amateur. The footage on these tapes gradually revealed the horrific nature of his crimes. The videos showed Karan meticulously filming the naked bodies of his victims. He moved the camera to capture various angles, with the flash repeatedly illuminating the scene. He then began dismembering the bodies, all of which took place inside his home. In the first tape, he used an electric saw but appeared inexperienced. By the second and third tapes, he had switched to professional surgical tools, executing the process with increased skill. In the final tape, Karan even smiled at the camera, a chilling smile that sent shivers down the spines of investigators. With this damning evidence, the police promptly submitted it to the court. Previously, Karan had persistently denied his crimes. However, one day, he suddenly asked the police whether the photos would be made public. Recognizing the intent behind his question, an officer responded sharply. All evidence would be disclosed, and the world would know what he had done. Hearing this, Karan finally confessed. The terrifying details of the case began to piece together, exposing the full scope of Karan's monstrous acts. Karan worked as a taxi driver and frequently operated in the Simshui area. He was well acquainted with the hours of operation for local entertainment venues and knew that late at night, he could reliably find passengers in the area. On February 3, 1982, it was raining, and Chan Funlan was so intoxicated that she was barely conscious. Her co-workers helped her hail a taxi. After being turned down by several drivers, Karan arrived and agreed to take her. During the ride, Chan Funlan occasionally pointed left and right, seemingly unsure of her destination. Karan grew increasingly impatient. At one point, she vomited inside the taxi. From her appearance and heavy makeup, Karan deduced that she was likely a nightclub dancer. Having a deep-seated disdain for women he perceived as such, coupled with the mess in his car, he felt a surge of rage. Karan deliberately drove back to his building while Chan Funlan remained asleep in the taxi. He went into his apartment, retrieved an electrical cord, and returned to the car. He then used the cord to strangle her. By that time, it was the middle of the night. The streets were deserted due to the rain, and no one witnessed his actions. After killing Chan Funlan, Karan retrieved a bag from his car's trunk, placed her body inside, and brought it to his apartment. He carefully hid the body under the sofa in the living room before calmly returning to his bed, contemplating his next steps. The following day, after his family members had left the house, Lam Karan executed a plan he had been devising. Driven by his obsession with the female body, he retrieved his photography equipment and meticulously photographed Chan Funlan's body from head to toe. To avoid her seeing him, he taped over her eyes. He then used an electric saw to dismember her body into 7 pieces. Wrapping the parts in newspaper, he loaded them into his car and drove around, considering where to dispose of them. Eventually, he chose a dense hillside area in Fotan to discard the remains. However, heavy rains in the following days caused the body parts to be washed into the Shingun River, where they were discovered by a sanitation worker. When Karan learned that parts of a body had been found, he realized he needed a more meticulous plan. Determined to avoid mistakes, he purchased medical anatomy textbooks and studied them for 3 months. During this time, Karan lived a quiet, low-profile life, drawing no attention to himself. Lam Karan was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. His case remains one of Hong Kong's most disturbing serial murder investigations. But it leaves us with a chilling thought. How many killers are still out there, hiding in plain sight? What do you think? Could this case have been solved sooner? Let us know in the comments. And if you love true crime stories, subscribe and check out our other deep dive investigations. Stay safe and stay vigilant.